Hi, my name is Emily Greenwell, and today I will be showcasing my global issue presentation on the humanitarian crisis in Xinjiang, China. Xinjiang is a vast autonomous territory in northwest China. It has been the home of the Uyghurs, an ethnic Turkic and Islamic group, for centuries. However, since the People's Republic of China took control of the region in 1949, a mass amount of Han Chinese, the ethnic majority in China, have migrated to Xinjiang. This migration has fostered tense relations between the two ethnic groups, often inciting riots and violence. The Chinese government, under the guise of responding to these tensions, have labeled the Uyghurs as a separatist-ruled terrorist group and have adopted horrific measures to silence the Uyghur population, most notably through their usage of political education camps. These camps, which are estimated to hold at least 1 million Uyghurs, are infamous for their appalling human rights violations, including slavery, rape, forced religious conversion, and mass ethnic genocide. Uyghurs are people who adhere to the Islamic faith, welcoming religious traditions such as fasting during Ramadan, studying the Quran, and wearing head coverings and scarves to promote modesty. The Communist ruling party of China, widely known for their horrific treatment of religious practicing individuals, have waged war against these cultural traditions, making it virtually impossible for Uyghurs to embrace their heritage and practice Islam freely. Han Chinese officials are placing immense pressures on the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, forcing them to accept this dystopian lifestyle and sacrifice their cultural and religious traditions in order to survive. The fears of being abducted and taken to these brutal political camps force Uyghurs into silence and complacency, preventing activists and advocates from speaking out against these atrocities. Only survivors who live outside of China are able to speak out against the humanitarian crisis. For example, Rushan Abbas, a Uyghur currently living in the United States, is an activist calling for the release of the imprisoned, including her sister, through her public policy work and her work directly with the survivors through her nonprofit, Campaign for Uyghurs. In Abbas's research, she details the grim stories of survivors and the survival tactic of silence Uyghurs utilize. In order to create real and significant change for the Uyghurs, Abbas is advocating for the United States to publish intelligent documents to initiate government action and public awareness. Fast fashion is the rapid production of inexpensive clothing in response to new and evolving style trends, ultimately revolutionizing the fashion industry through its ability to provide cheap, trendy, and fashionable clothes to consumers at an almost instantaneous rate. However, these clothes are produced by enslaved Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Uyghurs are being forced to pick and cultivate natural resources, such as cotton, and they are being forced to work in brutal and unsanitary textile factories in order to produce these clothes at rapid rates. International governments are turning a blind eye to the exploitation of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang due to the immense economic and international power of China, seen through their status as a United Nations P5 member and control over many of the natural resources of the world, including cotton. This not only allows for the cycle of Uyghur exploitation to persist, but it also means that American companies and consumers are directly funding the humanitarian crisis against the Uyghurs. Due to the popularity of fast fashion and the inaction of Western governments, it is estimated that the industry, built upon forced servitude and exploitation, will continue its exponential growth and be worth over $40 billion by 2025. Although these horrific human rights violations against the Uyghur Muslims are acknowledged by the United States and 43 other countries, these atrocities are not being addressed by the United Nations. This is due to China being a permanent member of the Security Council, a global body that maintains global peace and security, granting them the power to veto any resolution allowing for inaction to occur. This ultimately prevents the UN from aiding and intervening in crises occurring in P5 nations and their allies, which is seen through the continuation of China's deplorable treatment of the Uyghur Muslims. While this is disheartening, international scholars and activists, such as Joaquin Muller, are optimistic in the hopes that a new set of reforms might create a modern intergovernmental political system that would hold individual nations accountable for their human rights violations. Mueller's research highlights the outdated nature and practices within the UN, particularly emphasizing the growth of the United Nations and the size of both its members and overall global power, arguing that reform is a necessary response to the catalytic shift in our global political atmosphere. Mueller also highlights the frozen-in-time nature of the Security Council and their inability to modernize. While Mueller recognizes that the processes of establishing new procedures and systems will take many years to enact, let alone implement into the UN, he believes that the UN has the power to combat international human rights violations, such as the one occurring in Xinjiang, through verbal advocacy and public naming and shaming. The United Nations, without interrupting their current system of authority, has the power to enact change by publicly addressing the humanitarian crisis. This would bring public awareness to the ethnic torture and genocide of Uyghur Muslims, encouraging individual nations to retaliate through political action, such as restricting imports from Xinjiang. The Chinese government would also face global pressures, both politically and economically, through the act of naming and shaming, ultimately forcing China to halt the abusive practices against Uyghur Muslims. In conclusion, this course has taught me the prevalence of corruption within international governments. However, while this may appear to be a grim and pessimistic outtake, I have also learned the power of the common man and the influence our voices have in retaliating against cruel and corrupt governments, similar to the activists who are speaking out against the human rights violation in Xinjiang. Finally, here are my sources for your reference. Thank you so much for listening.